Welcome to a free on-demand webinar presented by Michigan Alliance for Families. We partner with experts from across the state to offer live webinars to help answer the questions we encounter most frequently. Our webinars are recorded and saved for future viewing. Handouts for our webinars can be found at michiganallianceforfamilies.org/webinar. Remember to keep up with Michigan Alliance for Families on Facebook and be sure to check out the other videos on our YouTube channel. Follow-up questions to this webinar can be directed to us at info@michiganallianceforfamilies.org. Today's webinar topic is progress monitoring, and our speaker is Kelly Orginski. Welcome, Kelly.
Hello, Emily. Thank you. So today we're going to talk about progress monitoring, which is not like the most exciting topic when you think about it, but it is the most important part when we talk about kids receiving special education support and service. So you need to keep in mind if you have an IEP, individual education program, if you've got one coming up, or if you've had one, the purpose of an IEP is access to and participation in the general education curriculum, extracurricular, and non-academic activities. There's one curriculum in the state of Michigan, and that's general ed. So you could have a 7th grade student reading at a 2nd grade level. It is about how do they make progress? How are we ensure that they're learning as they go along? It's about extracurricular and non-academic activities. And when we talk about progress monitoring, it's even more important when we talk about behavior and behaviors that might be getting in the way of learning due to their disability. It's even more important to talk about how do we monitor progress? How do we know what we're doing is helping a kid to be able to access the general ed, extracurricular, and non-academic activities. So I'm going to do a little bit of a review because we have to have a solid foundation of the process of an IEP in order to really make sure progress monitoring is done well. This is an individual education program, the process, and it's really important. We have other webinars that support each of these sections, but it's important that when you start having conversations within your IEP team, you've got one coming up, or you've had one and you're thinking it didn't go so well, it is so important to have a well-written present level of academic achievement and functional performance. If you do not have a well-written PLAF, nothing else will hold together. Most certainly being able to monitor progress. Progress monitoring will not happen if you don't have the data in the PLAF statement. So whether it's around academic achievement, reading, writing, math, or around behaviors, being able to sit still, pay attention, whatever those look like, it has to be identified and quantified within the PLAF. Then there's the goals and objectives. What is that student going to learn this year? What are we going to teach the student? What are they going to learn? This is based on the data that we have from the PLAF. This is what we're monitoring, parts of what we're monitoring. Are they learning what we're teaching them? How are they learning what we're teaching them? Then there's accommodations and modifications. What are we doing to make sure that they can access the general education curriculum, non-academics, and extracurriculars, kind of the things we're doing for the environment and for them to help. We can monitor progress with this too. We can adjust the accommodations and modifications perhaps to achieve more progress. And last is the supports and services. And that tends to be the people that are supporting the individual education program. They're the ones monitoring the progress, along with the other people on the IEP team. But what we're doing, what are we doing for that student? Are they achieving? Are they moving forward? So this is the line. So if you are having a conversation and all of a sudden you're only concentrating on accommodations and modifications and you haven't talked about the present level, you need to go back to the present level and talk about where's the data. How do we know this is where the student is presently? How do we know this? So IEPs, present levels, are written to ensure academic success, educational success. So when you look at your PLAF statement, whether you've just pulled it out, or you're thinking I need to pull it out or I need to get a copy of that, these are the 5 questions that are so important to have answered. So when you're reading through it, and it can be written as a lovely narrative, or it can be written present level academic achievement and functional performance per area of need, you want to talk about the child's strengths and weaknesses academically and functional performance. This is where we're starting to build where the child is and how do we monitor progress to make sure they move forward. So what are their strengths and weaknesses academically? Certainly we'll see in some PLAF statements the child has lots of friends and loves music. That's great, but academically that doesn't tell us where to build. How do we monitor progress? How do we know what they're learning? What helps your child learn? Is it concrete examples of work needing to be done? Is it a repeat of directions? What is it helps your child to learn in this environment? This is another place when we're progress monitoring. Do we need to tweak it or change things that have helped the child learn? What interferes or limits or interferes your child's learning? What is it about the environment, the child's disability? What is it that keeps a child from accessing the general education curriculum, extracurriculars, and non-academics? What you don't want to see here is a child's educational label or medical label, because it doesn't help us monitor progress. It doesn't help us guide their learning. It just tells us what their medical label is. You want objective data from current evaluations of your child. And objective data, we're talking no more than a year old. And that objective data can come from a wide variety of sources. It certainly can be end-of-the-book tests. It could be district tests. But it also could be just objective data. If they show you an example of the handwriting in September, an example of the handwriting in February, and the child's handwriting is improved, we know what they're doing is working. We can monitor that progress. That is a very visual monitor of the progress. What they're doing has made sure that the handwriting is improved. So it can be a wide variety when you talk about objective data, but it needs to be on the table to look at for the whole IEP team to say, yep, this is working, or how do we need to adjust the child's individual education program. How your child's disability affects his or her ability to be involved in progress in the general education curriculum. Again, you don't want to see the educational or medical label here. You want to talk about how the disability affects their ability to attend to information given or auditory directions. You want to see what is it about their disability that their sensory integration in the afternoon, sometimes that they are not aware of where their body is in space 3 out of 5 times during the week. And we'll talk more specifically about that, but it's not about the educational label or the medical diagnosis. So this is just an example of what a present level could look like, and it is so important to have a well-written present level. So when you go back and you think about, okay, I don't know whether my kid's making progress, I'm not sure what kind of data is in there, I need to kind of review it. You would take these 5 questions and put it on top, figuratively, on top of your present level. So when you look at this, when it talks about objective data for David's reading scores, what questions would you ask? The results of standardized testing using the Woodcock-Johnson show David's basic reading skills are at a beginning 4th grade level. His basic writing skills are at 3.7 grade level. You need to ask questions. If you don't know what a Woodcock-Johnson is, ask what it is. Is it the right assessment to assess David's basic reading level? If David's in 7th grade and he has a 4th grade reading level, it's important to know what does the objective data tell you. And if you can't tell what it is, that's the perfect time to slow the IEP process down, pull the team to talk about what does that mean. How does David's basic reading skills at a 4th grade level and his writing skills at a 3.7, which means 3rd grade, 7th month, how does that affect our instruction for David? What changes would we make? How would we monitor the progress to make sure this year he goes from 4th grade to, say, 5th grade in his reading level? When you look at David's weaknesses, David makes errors when he reads and has difficulty decoding long words, but his comprehension skills are strong. You know, what are the errors? How often does he make them? What does difficulty mean? What's a long word? You should be asking these questions around a PLAF statement. You should be asking your IEP team, I don't know what that means. So what is a long word? 5 letters, 8 letters? Is it in fiction or nonfiction? What does difficulty mean? Is it 80% of the time in everything David reads, or is it 60% of the time in fiction? So you would want to see those, and we'll talk more about those. But his comprehension skills are strong. Well, what's a comprehension skill and what is strong? He has a rich reading vocabulary. How do you measure rich? How do we monitor progress around rich? We really can't. So how do we know, yes, he has a rich reading vocabulary. How do we know if he's getting better? How do we know if he's lost skills? David uses context cues and picture cues to help him understand what he is reading. This is what helps him learn. But if you don't know what a context or a picture cue is, you need to ask. And how do they help him learn? When do they help him learn? How often is he using picture cues? And under what circumstances? All those questions should be answered in your PLAF. When writing, David frequently misspells words and uses incorrect punctuation. I hope you've gotten the gist of this now. What is frequently? How do we measure progress around frequently? And what is a misspelled word? How in what context? Is it fiction, nonfiction, spelling test? What does that look like? And he uses incorrect punctuation. Is that capitals and periods, or are we talking semicolons and hyphens? How often? When he's writing in a group, when he's writing by himself, when it's in his homework. You want to be able to have that piece in the specific pieces in his PLAF statement so we can monitor his progress. It is much easier for David to express himself by speaking rather than writing. Well, we all live with David and we know that, but what does that really mean? When given the option, when David can take the test orally, he scores 100% when asked the questions, versus when he's asked to write the questions, answer the questions by writing, he scores 40%. Those are the kinds of things you'd want to see in here. He sometimes gets frustrated when writing and hurries through his work. I'm sure you're here with me now. So what is frustrated? What does it look like when David is frustrated? Some kids are, falling on the floor loud. Their behaviors communicating they don't want to do the work. Other kids just simply drift off and start looking out the window. So we need to describe what frustration looks like for David, because we want to be able, through his IEP goals and objectives, instruct him about how to deal with his frustration so he can access the general education curriculum, non-academics, and extracurriculars. And we need to monitor the progress about the things that we are teaching him. How is it reducing his stress? What is he learning? And he hurries through his work. What does hurry look like? So you have a well-written PLAF statement. The 5 questions are answered. You're very comfortable with the data that describes the child, the data from a variety of pieces, because if you don't have that, you will not be able to monitor progress. So the next part is the goals and objectives. Once your child's needs are identified in the PLAF statement, the IEP team works to develop appropriate goals to address those needs. An annual goal describes what your child can be expected to do or learn within a 12-month period. IEPs are typically written for that school year. So we're talking about, we need data that says, if you have a 3 or a 5 or even a 7-year-old, we don't have a lot of data. They're new to this. We're figuring this out. If a 12, 14, 17-year-old, if we're doing progress monitoring well, we've collected data throughout the years, and we're able to say, on average, Kelly usually makes 8 to 10 months progress in any given school year. Or on average, Kelly makes a 4-month progress in any given school year. We've seen it the last 3 years, which is fine. Due to my disability, that is really good progress. But we need to be able to have that data to monitor that progress. Another way to look at goals and objectives when you pull out the IEP or you're going to write an IEP is of ways to think about, how do we make sure that they're well written? How do we make sure that they are teaching and being measured to assure educational benefit and to monitor progress? So one is, who would be the student here? You want to be able to specifically within that goal or objective talk about the skill or behavior we want to see improve. At what manner or at what level, and that's why the data is so important to talk about where Kelly is right now, and then what can we expect her to learn within the next school year. Where is it in what setting and under what conditions? And this is sometimes where the data conversations around monitoring progress need to be very clear. Are we talking with peers or with adults? Are we talking in a structured or unstructured setting? Are we talking with prompts or not prompts? Are we talking with a visual cue or not? It's really important when we talk about monitoring progress that we know what that looks like, what these goals and objectives look like, and by what time period, typically within a year. On the other side, the SMART is just another way to kind of think about, how do we measure goals and objectives? How are we talking about, are they specific enough? Are they measurable? Are they achievable? Are they results oriented, and are they timely? So either one of these is just a tool you could use when you look at the IEP and have conversations with an IEP team about whether the goals and objectives meet this criteria. Because when it comes to monitoring progress, again, if these pieces aren't in place, we're going to have lots of gaps in our conversations about what progress monitoring and whether the child's making progress or not. So here's just a visual. You're connecting the PLAF statement, present level of academic achievement and functional performance, to those goals. What are the overall goals? Reading, writing, behavior. What does it that we want Kelly to achieve in this 12-month school year period. And the objectives are the specific skills Kelly is going to learn, Kelly's going to be taught. And I think when we talk about objectives being skills that students are going to learn, it helps us frame different conversations as opposed to, well, you know, it's kind of sometimes osmosis, or that she's just supposed to learn this. You know, ones that we often see is, you know, Kelly will use her planner. Well, we all really want Kelly to use her planner. You know, we want her to use her planner to stay organized, but who's teaching her how to use the planner? What accommodations do we have in place? Where is she now? How often is she using her planner? How often do we want her to use her planner? All of those need to be answered before we can monitor the progress. And so you really need to have this well connected. And this is an absolute wonderful place to start a conversation over again. If you look through that IEP and it's not holding together, it's not that linear process, to say, well, do we need more data? Do we need to define this goal better? This objective doesn't seem to be connected to the goals. It's really important that these three pieces are very evident, and everybody on the IEP team can see them, that they're there. We're all clear about where we're working towards. So when we come to monitoring the progress on these, we all know what we're looking at. So you have a well-written PLAF statement with all the 5 questions answered. Your goals and objectives are measurable and timely. You understand what conditions and when they're happening. And then the conversation kind of falls off in IEP meetings. And they talk about, you know, usually on IEPs, there's this grid, sometimes at the bottom, sometimes at the top, and it's just automatically filled in. You know, progress is going to be measured M and 6, like monthly by team member, or there isn't really a conversation about progress monitoring. I think IEP teams are so used to just, they know they're supposed to do it in general, and they just kind of click those boxes. But as parents, as a member of an IEP team, or others that support parents, we can have that question about progress monitoring. And so these are some critical questions when you might be feeling lost in the process, when you're thinking that you've got a well-written PLAF with goals and objectives, always making progress. So these are some ways to think about that. So what are the student or students expected to learn? So what is Kelly supposed to learn within the general education program? What is she supposed to learn within her IEP or her learning goals? What is it specific? The whole entire IEP team should be very clear about what this looks like. What is the student supposed to learn? And I think when you involve students in the process, kind of those I can statements, you know, I can write 3 sentences with correct punctuation. Just another way to look at that if depending on the child's disability and how it affects their ability in the general education curriculum, non-academics and extracurriculars, could be also a good way to think about where the child is. I can sit still for 20 minutes. I mean, you could bring that data to the table, the parents or people that the child trusts. You can start bringing some of that, the child's own perspective data into it. When you talk about monitoring progress, you want to talk about by when. When are we looking to make sure the progress is being made? Yes, we say the IEPs are written for 1 year, but all of us on the IEP team have had the conversation where you get to the end of the year and Kelly hasn't made the progress, and we'll talk some more specific about that. And nobody really talks about what does that mean and how we're going to do that and what does that look. So, you know, by when. The general education curriculum is very specific in terms of the scope and the sequence about by when, what 2nd graders are supposed to learn, what 7th graders are supposed to learn. Another tool that sometimes when you talk about are those curriculum maps, and some schools do curriculum maps and some don't. For some kids with identified disabilities, a curriculum map sometimes helps figure out what parts of the curriculum are important for the student and what parts aren't. So if Kelly has an educational label of cognitively impaired, it might not be important for her to know all the parts of 7th grade social studies, but a curriculum map would help us figure out what are the parts are important. So that they're a tool that can be used to talk about when. If the child isn't going to be making the same progress in the general education curriculum, curriculum maps are often helpful in that. And lastly, IEP goals and objectives can also help us talk about how we, by when, and we'll talk more about, particularly IEPs can help us really talk about by when, because it is part of the IEP and progress monitoring is part of that. How will we know if they're learning? You know, how do we know if a student is learning what we're teaching them? How do we know they're learning? I was with a group of community members recently, and one of the teachers said to me, she said, well, you know, I'm not really a data person. You know, I really measure it by their success. And I turned to her and I said, but that is data. If a child is succeeding, if what you're doing, they're making progress and they're succeeding, that is monitoring progress. It's not by numbers, although numbers are sometimes the way to start those conversations. So how do you know? Well, there's all kinds of assessments, objective data to talk about how the student is moving forward, and the whole progress monitoring part. How are we really making sure what we're doing is helping the student learn? What will we do if a student hasn't made progress? What interventions will we put in place? Are there other things we can do? Do we need to change the instructional method? Do we need other accommodations and modifications? Have we talked about assistive technology? What are we going to do if Kelly is meeting all her goals and objectives? And lastly, what do we do to extend their learning if they have met their objectives? And rarely do IEP teams say, well, you know, Kelly met all our objectives in December and we're not going to do any more. But if we have good data, if we're monitoring progress well, and she does meet her goals and objectives, we'll know what to do to extend that learning. What is it that Kelly needs to do next? What does she need to do within general education curriculum? What does she need to do within her IEP goals? So these are just some kind of conversations that I think are questions that kind of help that. Frequently when I talk to parents, everybody's worried about when progress monitoring data are new, everybody's worried about, parents frequently worry goals and objectives aren't high enough. So the data tells us where the student is, and then the conversation can be, well, the data says that Kelly knows 15 of her 26 alphabet letters. The parent, you know, as a parent, you say, well, no, she identifies all 26 at home. We can have a better conversation then about, so in school, you're right, within 3 weeks she was telling us all 26 letters. What are we going to do next? So these questions kind of help frame those conversations when you get stuck with an IEP and you're not sure it's moving forward. Drilling down to progress monitoring is the place to go. So this would be an annual goal line, and the numbers on the left and the bottom are kind of what you would expect. It could be any number of letters or numbers on either side. You can absolutely bring graph paper to an IEP. I know parents that do that, and also IEP members that support that bring graph paper to talk about what this would look like. This is what you want to see when you talk about monitoring progress. You want to see that annual goal line from 40, whatever, to 14. That is a gradual goal. It's a gradual upward tick. We know that Kelly is learning. We're monitoring her progress at different points in her, and we'll talk more specifically, and we want to see that upward tick. We want to be able to physically touch it, see it, smell it. We want to have it in front of us to know that Kelly is learning. So the progress, when the progress is greater than the goal, you increase the goal. So again, if you are collecting good data, if the team is on target about what they're collecting, about how, whether Kelly knows her letters, whether she sits still, whether she's not hitting, whatever the goal is, you're collecting data, and we'll talk about how do you collect this data? You know, who's collecting that data? It needs to be really well defined. And so if we start collecting data in the beginning of the year and all the data says that she's above her goal line, you would simply increase the goal. That you know, the data that we had in September from the end of last year said this is where she was, but as we start monitoring progress within the 5th grade classroom, 7th grade classroom, you know, Kelly has made some gains over the summer, whatever came together for her, and all the data shows she's above it. We're going to get the IEP team together, whether it's an amendment or we want to call the team together, perhaps if it's a behavior goal, and we're going to want to increase the goal. We're going to want to look at, well, look at all the data says that she's here, she's met it. How do we increase that goal? How do we make sure that she continues to learn? This is the other part, though sometimes, you know, it's a hard conversation to have, but not making progress. And this is where it's even more important, I think, with progress monitoring, or oftentimes where we have the conversations, is that, you know, if a student isn't making progress, how do we know they're not making progress? You know, some of the most ambiguous conversations happen in IEP teams about whether we think Kelly's making progress or not. Well, you know, the school does and the parents don't, or the parents do in the school. I mean, it's not any one way or another. But if we're monitoring progress, if we're collecting, if we're clear about what those goals and objectives are, and we know through the PLAF statement where Kelly was when she started, we're able to say whether what's happening is working. So when you look at, you need to change the instructional program. So we are, Kelly's not in progress. Why isn't she making progress? Well, is it around that she needs different accommodations or modifications? Is it that she needs a different reading? Does she need different writing instruction? Does she need some one-on-one or some small group math instruction? A lot of times when kids are older, it's easier when we talk about not making progress if we've had good data from a year or two before, and we get to this year and things aren't quite right, that we can go back and look and say, well, this, and this worked. We monitored progress. These were the progress lines that happened, and what's not happening this year. So it's really important. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing if a child's not making progress, but it's so important that we're monitoring it, that we don't waste 2 weeks, 2 months, or even a year, that we need to make sure that what we're doing is working or not, and if it's not, we need to change the instructional program. We need to talk about what else we need to do for Kelly, not what Kelly needs to do. So some ways to think about progress monitoring, and how do we, the minimal expectation for instructional recommendations. So this is the minimum progress monitoring you would think for any student. Any student. The progress monitoring frequency for kind of those benchmarks, that core general education curriculum, kids are usually monitored 3 times a year. Teachers usually do some assessments in September, then there's the end of semester in January, and then the end of semester in May. So those are usually, all students are measured by those 3 measures. Some school districts have, you know, progress reports every 9 weeks, 12 weeks. Every district's different. Kind of need to decide what that looks like. But you know that at least those would be 3 places you would look for all students and kids with IEPs. You would look for kind of where are they within the general education curriculum and within their own IEP goals. When we're looking at more strategic support, and I think of strategic support when you think about resource rooms, or you think about kind of those people that see them, occupational therapists, physical therapists, teacher consultants, whatever it looks like, because again, every IEP is individual, but you would be looking for kind of monthly progress toward data. You would ask the speech and language therapist, you know, what does it look like? The speech and language therapist, usually minimums, you know, say once a week for 30 minutes. Well, we should be able within a month to see whether what she's doing is Kelly making progress. So you'd expect some monthly. For some of those more intensive supports, you would expect some weekly data coming in. Kids that are in very specific, perhaps reading programs or behavior programs, I mean programs within their IEP that are happening to them within their 3rd grade classroom or their 7th grade classroom. That kind of, okay, this child's eligible for special education support and service. We need to have a behavior person in here, and we're going to put some pretty intensive supports here to help Kelly learn to not run in the hall, not hit, bite, whatever that looks like. You would expect some weekly data reporting from monitoring progress of this, is what we're doing works. So, you know, depending on where the student is, monitoring progress, we need to have these conversations. If we're talking about a student who has some pretty big behaviors that are getting in the way of their learning, we would want the progress monitored more frequently than September, January, or May. You know, that just doesn't make a lot of sense. We're setting up the kid to fail and the entire team not to do well if we're only looking at things that need that intensive support 3 times a year. So this is another piece to kind of change the conversations within an IEP around how we're making sure the student is going to stay here, that they're learning, whatever that disability gets in the way with the learning. How are we ensuring that? And progress monitoring, these are just some benchmarks to have that conversation about what this looks like. It can certainly be every 6 weeks, it could be every 2 weeks, it could be every 14 days. The IEP team decides on what that looks like, but this is the part to have the conversation about. Personal experience. When my son was young, we would get reports of progress monitoring. Student is progressing, expected rate to achieve at the end of the year. It's a little tiny thing at the end of the IEP, and you went, yep. You got to the end of the year, and he did not achieve it. And when I went back and asked, well, up until May, he was achieving an expected rate, and why isn't he now? And because I wasn't good at progress monitoring, there was no real conversation. They just said, well, we don't feel he has the skill yet. So what do you do when they don't feel he has the skill yet? And that's why this progress monitoring is so important. It helps change those conversations. So when you go back and you say, doesn't have the skill yet, well, how do we know he doesn't have the skill yet? And let's just say it's speech and language goals and objectives. And you get to the end of the year and, well, we just don't feel he's concrete in that skill yet. The conversation is, well, the conversation from the parent to the IEP team, or specifically to the speech and language person, is, how do you know? And ask them to pull out their data. Ask them to pull out their progress monitoring records. Ask them to pull those pieces together. Frequently they have them and have not been asked how to do that, and sometimes they don't, and it gives the opportunity again for the IEP team to go back and go, okay, we need to make sure what we're doing is working. And so for that example, when they went back and pulled out speech and language goals, although he had not met, I think it was 80% of the time, when she really looked from the beginning of the year till May, he was at like 78% of the time. So he had almost made the goal, but not quite. But it took quite a few conversations and some real digging in to talk about how was the progress monitored. Was she monitoring progress? Was it done in such a way that we were able to see that progress was being made? It's a very concrete conversation when you talk about progress monitoring. It's either there or it's not. Either it's been monitored or it hasn't. So another way to think about progress monitoring is the curriculum-based measurements. The IEP must include assessment information pertaining to the student's individual needs, educational program that addresses those needs, and a system of monitoring the progress. So assessment information pertaining to the student's individual needs, that would be the present level of academic achievement and functional performance. Individual program that addresses those needs are kind of those goals and objectives, along with the supports and services and accommodations and modifications. So how do we need? And a system for monitoring student progress. Curriculum-based measurement is a type of alternative assessment methodology that can be used both to fulfill those IEP requirements and to assist educators and parents in developing an IEP that is educationally meaningful. As you can see, from 2003, this has been around a while. We have one curriculum in Michigan. It should be a place that we should be able to measure student success when it comes to academics. And so this is a piece to help kind of think about how do we pull that together? How do we use the curriculum to make sure a student is moving through that general education curriculum, and how do we make sure that it's being assessed and monitored correctly? So this is just a few ways to help you think about, okay, Kelly, I think I've got this progress monitoring. Understand that we're sort of a well-written present level of academic achievement and functional performance. We want to make sure that we know exactly where the child is both academically and behavior. What do those behaviors look like? When do they happen? Who do they happen with? We have goals and objectives that are the skills that students are going to learn. We have the support and service and accommodations and modifications, and we're going to monitor this on a we've decided that that it's important to really monitor on a monthly basis. We're going to have for Joe, we're going to have her. She's probably going to be doing instruction on a daily basis, but we're going to ask for a monthly basis. So Joe recognizes numbers to 100. He has emergent skills in math vocabulary, identifies coins and coin values, as well as $1, $5, and $10. That's the goal. The data shows this is what Joe knows. That's the goal. So this next year, Joe is going to identify key vocabulary to determine when to add or subtract in all total difference with 80% accuracy. If you notice here, it's about addition or subtraction. It's not all math vocabulary. We're going to assume that the data set in the PLAF statement that it's around identifying math vocabulary for just addition and subtraction. In the next year, Joe will read whole numbers to 500, examples 398 with 80% accuracy. So what does that look like? That we know he can identify numbers to 100, so within the next year he's going to go from 100 to 500. Joe's going to order numbers to 100 and compare using phrases such as same as, more than, greater than, and fewer than with 80% accuracy. Count out dollars and coins needed to make a purchase with 80% accuracy. So the questions you would need to ask here when you're talking about monitoring progress, I would be asking is, what is 80% accuracy? Count out dollars and coins needed to make a purchase with 80% accuracy. How often is he doing that? Is he doing that every day with the teacher? Is he doing it every day in the lunchroom? Is he doing it, and how would they monitor this when he goes out with his friends? How are you talking 80% accuracy? That would be 8 out of 10 times. You know, what, once a day, 8 out of 10 days? What does that really look like? So when we go back to the critical questions, what's the purpose of the learning? Why do we want him to do that? And this is frequently, for parents and IEP team members, this is the place where you start asking those questions. I would be asking, count out dollars and coins needed to make a purchase with 80% accuracy. What does that look like for Joe? How often is it happening? When do we know he has it? Under what circumstances or under what conditions are we expecting him to know that? I think if you go to the second bullet where it says read whole numbers to 500, 398, 80% accuracy, that would be, if Joe is receiving specific instruction, that would be an easier place for a teacher consultant or a teacher to be able to monitor that progress, that they once a day, once a math lesson, whatever that looks like, they're instructing him and then they're checking in to see how well he's doing. That would be a little bit easier one to monitor progress to see what that looks like. Another example was Mary has difficulty identifying main ideas and important details to informational text, comparing and contrasting ideas of concepts from informational text, and summarizing information she's heard or read. Okay, so I'm not saying this is a great goal. I'm saying in terms of helping IEP teams move forward, helping us figure out about whether Mary is making progress, whether we're monitoring progress. There's a lot in here in this goal. Mary has difficulty identifying main ideas. That's one skill. And important details, that's another skill in informational text. Comparing is one skill, contrasting is another skill, ideas of concepts from informational text. And here's another skill, summarizing information she has heard or read. How do you monitor progress on that? You're talking 5 or 6 different concepts within that one goal area to monitor progress. How is she learning? Do we know what we're doing for Mary? Is she summarizing information she has heard? Mary will name a main idea given a choice if necessary. Mary will name a main idea given choices if necessary. 2 out of 3 trials. Our job is to ask, what does that mean? How often are we monitoring their progress? Who is doing that? What does a main idea look like? We're going to assume in her PLAF statement that we've identified when given a 2-paragraph text, Mary is able to identify the main idea 40% of the time. That's progress monitoring, that we know where Mary is and we're moving forward. Mary will identify relevant details given 2 to 4 choices to name the main ideas, 2 to 3 trials. We see this written all the time. How do you monitor progress on this? How do we know that Mary's moving forward? What are 2 to 3 trials? What are 2 to 4 choices? How are we going to monitor the progress given 2 to 4 choices? Mary can do it given 2 choices 100% of the time. Mary can do it given 3 choices 40% of the time. What does that look like? Mary will name 1 to 2 key details given choices if necessary for a given main idea following a paragraph. Again, how do you monitor progress in this one? This is that we frequently see goals and objectives written this way, but we need to be able to talk about progress monitoring about Mary will name 1 to 2 key details. So we're going to assume in her class statement that she was able to name 1 to 2 key details at 90% accuracy. Given choices, if necessary, for a given main idea following a paragraph. Again, what 2 to 3 trials is that with a teacher consultant? Is every time in the classroom? Is that across everything she's reading? Math, science, social studies, literature. Mary will compare and contrast given objectives or ideas from the curriculum, starting with basic objective comparison. Basic object comparison. Again, what does that look like? Is her compare and contrast given objects or ideas from the curriculum? How is she able to do that currently? And what do 2 to 3 trials mean? I think that when you're talking about progress monitoring is so important for the IEP team to know what we're talking about here. 80%, 3 out of 4 times, 2 to 3 trials. What we need and how we're making sure that Mary is moving forward, that what we're teaching, she's learning. So this is another, when you're getting your head around student progress monitoring, there's a national center. This is just another resource to go to and take a look at what that might be. Here are some resources from the Michigan Alliance for Families, your 800 number for the parent advocate. We have a whole progress monitoring webpage because it is that important. There's other webinars. If you've heard me talk today and we've talked about present level of academic achievement or goals and objectives, and you're like, oh, I really need to know more about that, you can get your head around what that present level is so you can have better outcomes around progress monitoring. Oops, sorry. There's the National Center there's the SIPR document, which really is a nice piece that talks about from the beginning to the end, kind of what I talked about. They have a lot more information in it. There's the National Center on Progress Monitoring, and the MDE helpline is always there to ask questions. I would go with the Michigan Alliance resources first. They're quicker, they're easier, they're right there with you. You can get a hold of them. We're funded by the Department of Education. This is how to get hold of us.